Oh,
That sounds right.
A year ago.
yeah.
Isabella, Chesapeake and Ohio.
Oh, City. Hi, this is.
You might need to come to the mic. Why don't you sit here and also-
Okay.
Especially here, so I can see them.
Camp meetings and Chautauquas, America's 19th century back to the nature movement. The West Vincent Historic Resources Committee welcomes you tonight to an entertaining and informative presentation given by Robert J. Wise Jr. My name is Cindy Clark, and I've lived in West Vincent for 25 years, and my interest in local history led to me becoming a volunteer researcher. Tonight's presenter, also known as Bob Wise, is a township resident and the current chair of the West Vincent Historical Committee. He has a Master of Science in Historic Preservation from the University of Pennsylvania. He is currently the Principal Senior Architectural Historian at Richard Grubb and Associates, Inc. Bob's expertise includes all levels of federal regulatory compliance, intensive level historic architectural surveys, historic structure reports, National Register and National Historic Landmark nominations, battlefield preservation, site interpretation, resource protection ordinances, municipal planning assistance, and even more.
Yes.
Please welcome Bob Wise.
Last time it was a long, and she kept reading and reading, and I'm like, and then I thought it was gonna be shorter. Thought it was gonna be shorter, but
This is being recorded, so we can't be snide.
no Bronx cheers, no tomatoes, no nothing. You know, you just have to sit there quietly and fall asleep. But the same rules apply. You can fall asleep, but just don't make noise. You know, then you can relax. But so my name is Bob Wise. I am an architectural historian. I'm not the whatever architectural historian with RGA. I'm architectural historian, principal architectural historian. And I'm even less so now because I'm semi-retired. So I'm like part-time. And if you give me a good ovation when this is done, standing possibly for the cameras, then maybe I'll do more of these, later on if I can figure out what else to talk about. But thank you very much for coming out. I wish we had more people, but I appreciate that you're here. And you think when you give a talk that, geez, if nobody shows up, it's going to be easier. For some reason, if you have fewer people laugh at your jokes. My jokes are really bad. So that means people won't laugh at them. You're just going to be sitting there and you probably will fall asleep and maybe make noise or not. But this is and can be a rather lengthy presentation. So I think I better just start and talk about camp meetings at Chautauquas. We say mostly Chautauquas because when I first gave this presentation, it was built up more as a Chautauqua thing. And about 2 days before the event, I read the memo and it was like, wait, we only brush on Chautauquas, sort of end with Chautauqua, but so this is mostly about camp meetings. So if you came tonight for Chautauquas, you won't be disappointed. You won't be disappointed, but it's mainly camp meetings. And I got interested in camp meetings because as an architectural historian, I was retained to do some National Register nominations for some of these camp meetings. This is Perkasie Park and Chester Heights and also Brandywine Summit. And I had never known what a camp meeting is. And whenever I would tell people about camp meetings and this work we're doing, no one, maybe it's my Episcopalian upbringing, would know what these camp meetings are. So after many years, I thought maybe I'll put a presentation together. And as I got into it and dragged my wife all over Southeast Pennsylvania and New Jersey to these camp meetings, it's really amazing what we do have here in Southeast Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, we've lost probably half or more than what we had originally, but it's great that they are still here. They are still functioning for the most part, and they're very welcoming to go check out. So every time we went into one unannounced, we would meet people and get tours and go into their cottages. So it was a really great experience. So why don't we, tonight we're going to hear a little bit of background and I'm going to visit those. So we're going to visit some of those camp meetings. And just real quick, camp meetings, and we'll get to Chautauquas later because they started far later in the process. Camp meetings was a movement to go outside of the church and go outside of some of the church teachings and bring religion to people out in the hinterlands way back when in the early to mid 1700s. And basically there were a couple different phases, but it morphed eventually into what I call the permanent camp meetings, which are permanent sites in which people go yearly and do their camp meeting thing, which we'll talk about. But as much as they're the same, they're also different. Here are 3 camp meetings, and this is their brochures or information, and I just want to read this. This is Chester Heights camp meeting. It was started after the aftermath of the Civil War, where 620,000 soldiers were killed, half of all deaths in the U.S. soldiers in all wars combined. The total military casualties, killed, wounded, and missing was 1.5 million. The above statistics do not include civilian casualties. The 1860 census, counted almost 4 million slaves, about 12% of the U.S. population. Almost everyone had family or friends who died, suffered, or were displaced. Camp meetings were where people came who were desperate. They heard the word of God and became a new creation. Landisville camp meeting. Nestled in a wooded grove sits a collection of historic cottages and buildings. It was born out of a spiritual revival from a time when people came by horse, buggy, and train to hear the word of God. Over the past 150 years, these grounds have seen many changes, and the souls of sinners to saints. Yet one thing remains the same, that it is all for his glory. One more, you see the differences. Perkasie camp meeting. For all those seeking rest for the body, stimulus for the mind, and profit for the soul, we extend a cordial invitation. I bring those up to just show you that the differences of the intent of camp meetings and how people feel about their own camp meetings and how they would like other people to think about their camp meetings. Some seem more serious, some seem more godly, some seem less godly, but they all bring people together and historically brought them into the woods as we get into these more permanent camp meetings, which we're going to talk about. Camp meetings took place outside as they started to find more permanent locations, more yearly locations. They had some prerequisites, and often they went into the woods. There was no air conditioning back then. They needed privacy. They needed protection. They wanted to get away from people and sinners and the sinly things that people do. So they would often go and find a grove of trees. In fact, a lot of these places are called groves, some type of camp meeting grove. In fact, B.W., it's not Bob Wise, but B.W. Gorham wrote a manual back in 1854, and he thought there were 3 keys to successful meetings: a hospitable environment, natural resources, and proper landscape and atmosphere. So again, going out of the grove, getting away from the city, and just how cities had become, at least in the mid to late 1800s. These were the places people sought to build their camp meetings. And again, trees were very important. You go to some of these camp meetings and that's all you see is trees everywhere, trees growing up on the side of buildings. I mean, these have trees in the buildings. And some of them have very, strict rules about what you can do with trees, or in this case, what you can't do with trees. But through it all, I think Brandywine Summit Camp Meeting down in Delaware County, I think they have it right. You revive, restore, and renew. So it's a little bit religious, well, a lot religious, but it's also a relaxation of your mind, body, and soul. So that's what these camp meetings brought, and that's what they continue to bring. But where do these camp meetings come from? How do they originate? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I have great pictures to show, but there is a timeline. Again, it somewhat harkens back to the Great Awakening movement in the early 1700s or early 1800s. And in the mid 1800s, you start to have, or early to mid 1800s, you start to have camp meetings that come together every year for a couple of weeks in the same location, as I said, in these groves in the woods, for example. And that's where that manual got written. You start to have ways of doing it. Standardization, if you will. you'll see how the wars in this country affect camp meetings. And after the Civil War, we really see the rise of what I call permanent camp meetings, what we still have today. And back then, as I said, the cities had gotten really dirty. People were nervous just living in them. So this is a way to get away from all the things that the city brought people, especially middle class who couldn't really just, well, they couldn't get on a plane, but get on a nice, a private car and go someplace. These offered that sort of inexpensive vacation, if you will. And then a little bit later, the Chautauqua movement begins, which we'll talk about. And then post-World War II, we have a decline in camp meetings for many reasons, and actually started, prior to World War II, but really after World War II, we see a decline in camp meetings. And today, I say stabilization. I think for the most part that I've seen around here, they've stabilized, and now it's just a matter of keeping what they have, but that gets difficult too, as we'll see. So the Great Awakening, mid-1700s, this was a means of going out. You'd have itinerant preachers going out into the hinterlands and spreading the word. Some places had churches, some places didn't, but it was basically bringing people to the call of God that possibly had no religion. So that was sort of the first, very short explanation of the Great Awakening, and a lot of Baptists were involved, and then you had Methodists. And again, it was in the small towns, it was villages, often out in the woods, and they would get together for a meeting, and then they would go on to the next place. So there was no real, it was probably a one-day type of event, and then you go forward, and then you go to the next place. Couple people who were very involved in this, George Whitefield, for example, he went 5,000 miles in 1 year. I mean, these guys just, rode up and down. It started in the South primarily, but they went throughout and again, spread the word of God. So it was pretty amazing. I'm not sure about this picture. I just found this today, and I tried to cite pictures where I can, and where I couldn't find citations. I apologize for people who may be watching this, but this picture is very strange because it looks like the guy on the left is taking a stick or a sword. He's about to hit the preacher. There's people with funny hats down there. One guy looks like he's got horns right behind the preacher. And then there's soldiers on the right as if they're going into battle. So I really don't know what's happening with this picture. Maybe it's just on the wrong place in the internet. I don't know. But this picture is from a Methodist camp meeting. Methodists, again, that was their MO. They brought their preaching, itinerant type of preaching from England and Scotland, and brought it to America, and said, hey, how are we going to get our word out? Well, we'll go take our word out to the people. So that's what the Methodists did in a big way. And they were probably more than anybody else, the Baptists as well, the folks that really are behind the whole camp meeting movement. The Second Great Awakening occurred in the late 1700s. We had a little war, rebellion. And so after that war, people started going back out again. And again, the Methodists really started coming around and taking their message out. And a lot of things started happening in this time frame. The meetings got bigger. That's where you hear fire and brimstone. It's not so much, hey, let me introduce you to a religion. It's more now, hey, let's make you a more godly person. Fire and brimstone, I mean, look at this. This whole picture looks like, to me, like Dante's Inferno. It looks like people have been struck down by that preacher right through the middle, and they're laying all over the place. So I'm not really sure what's happening there, but it's a very interesting thing. And the other thing I like about this picture, even though it's early, you start seeing the tents in the back, obviously some artistic license there because, they'd be giant tents, but same with the pulpit. But that's what they did. They started to bring tents, staying there for more than 1 day, maybe 3 days, and building pulpits in the woods, not just having some platform, but actually some type of more standardized pulpit. And here's just a couple other pictures. I mean, the guy on the right, that poor guy, I mean, you could just see him riding 5,000 miles on that poor horse in the rain and all kinds of weather. But that's what they did. And that's how the camp meeting movement really began. Again, the Second Great Awakening occurred after the Civil War. I'm sorry, after Revolution and well into the 1800s. we have, again, this prelude to what I call the modern camp meetings, the built environment of the camp meetings. But a couple interesting things is that this was a way, again, to spread the Protestant religion, and even the Episcopalians, I guess, got involved. There was actually some involvement with slaves and freed blacks in the South and other places. Although, from what I've read, they weren't they didn't commingle. They had to be separate, but still they brought the word to blacks in the South and even slaves. It was influenced to some degree by social reform movements that started taking place in a big way, especially as we get well into the 1800s. And this is interesting because I just said it was less fire and brimstone. Here I have less fire and brimstone. It probably is as they got further into the 1800s, you had less of that fire and brimstone preaching, but I may have some signals crossed there. And as we move into the mid 1800s, again, you see longer periods of time that people are meeting. You see tent cities grow up and more standardization. And I had talked about before the manual by B.W. Gorham in 1854, and they started laying out rules and how to conduct these camp meetings, how to conduct a successful camp meeting so people show up and you can spread your word. And what I call the third Great Awakening, and I even have an asterisk here, that is my term. I don't know if there is such a thing of a third Great Awakening, but it's between some major wars of ours, the post-Civil War to World War II. And this is really the modern camp meeting movement. It's where we have, again, these permanent places that people can go and conduct their camp meetings. They don't just have to go out in the woods anymore or build a pulpit with pitch to light the fire so they can preach into the night. You had camp meetings started by local churches and individuals and friends, and people would get together and said, hey, why don't we create a place that people can go and have fellowship or preach with one another, et cetera, and sing. Why don't we do this? Because singing, I should have said before, the Methodists brought a lot of singing into this whole thing. So that became a big thing. So let's get together and do this. We'll pour money. We'll find people that have land, and we'll start creating these sites. Again, permanent locations, structures, and organizations, standardized plans. Some of those plans you'll see in a moment had actual street systems, and you had various organizations that would be created as an outgrowth of this. And we went from these open preaching, as I just mentioned, to really permanent buildings called tabernacles or auditoriums where people could gather under shelter and hear the word, because these words went on at times all day and into the night. They just kept going and going and going, and they had quite a schedule. And then where people first came and built tents, you'll see how they converted to cottages. So some were always cottages, but many of the early ones were tents, and little by little were switched over to cottages. And we have semi-permanent living. People would go there not just for a week, but maybe all summer. Most are not permanent all year long, but we have some of that too that we'll talk about. So standardized plans, there were really some key essential planning elements to setting up a camp meeting. And this is where we have a little lesson in shapes. On the left is what they call an oblong square. I call it a rectangle, but it's actually called a circle. So that's very strange, but the center of a camp meeting is called the circle. Prayer circle, I'm not sure exactly where that term came from, but rarely were they circles. They were usually rectangles that they called oblong squares. So go figure. But as you can see, you have benches in the middle. In the beginning, they would have pulpits or some type of stages on both ends. I haven't seen that. I've only seen one stage or one sort of altar on one end. And then surrounding these, you would have the tents. Another popular one is on the upper right, which is called the horseshoe, which is the same, but it's rounded on one end. And again, the circle is in the middle. And then on the far right, you actually do have a circle. So we have examples of all these here. And just real quickly, you can see that in action. This is actually a tax parcel map over an aerial photo in Mount Lebanon, in Lebanon County. And, you know, you can see that oblong square known as a rectangle that's actually called a circle right in the middle. And in this particular case, they have a large auditorium, which is that circular building. Around it, then you have the cottages. And then around that, you have a loop road, which, for example, in the Chester Heights and others, some of these you're not allowed to drive into the inner part and the inner streets because they're very narrow. So it's a nice way of creating actually a city plan. And you can imagine having kids and saying to them, hey, I don't care what you do all day, just don't go outside that loop road. So before we get into some of these, I just leave you with this picture. This is, I think, in Massachusetts in the 1850s. I call this a transitional photo. There's some things happening here. You can see really the built environment all around this. You can see what look like buildings. Maybe they're tents in the background. You can see the pulpit is now a relatively large building, unless maybe that's next to another building, but I assume this is a regular camp meeting. And again, we still have the trees. But there is so much going on with this picture. The guy in the very front with his hat off, he's got a gun sitting there across the benches. So I'm not sure what his deal is. Maybe to keep bad people away from the camp meeting. I don't know. You see this guy preaching. He could have been there for hours. The guy to his right, the red-haired guy, looks like he's sound asleep. The guy in the middle there is like, what did I get myself into? And I don't know what the guy on the far left is thinking. The guy on the far right up there looks dead. I mean, he's been there for so long. So there's a lot of weirdness going on in this picture, but it sort of sums up everything. So let's visit some of these camp meetings. Are we good with time? Are you all, because we only have like 2 hours to go, but it's all right. You'll enjoy it. So what I want to do is just, first of all, show you that, you know, in Southeast Pennsylvania and parts of Southern New Jersey, there's a lot of camp meetings. You don't have to go to, you know, Oak Bluffs or to Seaside Heights or some of these ones that you've probably heard about. They're right here, and they're close. They're very opening as far as welcoming, I should say. And this is a great time to visit because some of these have tourists walking through. They just get busy with cottage owners, and this time of year it's very quiet. So it's a nice time to visit. So I'm gonna show you all these. Some longer, will take longer than others, but let's start with Brandywine Summit. That was one of the first National Register nomination I did you didn't say this, Cindy, when I was working for the Brandywine Conservancy, but and it was right around the corner, and I, you know, drove around off of 202 and Route 1 and went into this place, and it's like, oh my gosh, is this a cult? What's happening here? I've never seen a place like this. And this is a unique camp meeting in and of itself. Almost all camp meetings have some type of very welcoming sign that you walk under to enter. And this one started right after the Civil War with some Methodist Methodist churches, mostly in Wilmington. They went and they found the land, this grove of woods, which you'll see in a minute, and started this camp meeting. So it's one of the earliest and continuous camp meetings in this area. And again, that rest, restore, renew is really fitting for what you see here. This old map, I think, I forget what year this map is, but as you can see where that arrow's pointing, that sort of fuzzy stuff is forest. And so this Johnson's Woods made a great place to start this camp meeting. And the camp meeting also was a great location because eventually you had railroads running near it. You had major roads running near it. So it was easy to get to from Wilmington to the south and then some other towns and cities. And in fact, just to skip a little bit, transportation was very much a part of the success of some of these camp meetings because some of them had day trippers that would come up for the Sunday and they would get thousands of people. I can't even think about some of the necessaries for thousands of people, what they did, how they managed just feeding people, restrooms. You know, you didn't bring a truck full of Job Johnnies. So I don't know what they did, but it was important to have some type of transportation for a lot of these. So a Brandywine Summit, here's just a couple maps. And again, you see in the interior, the circle, that's the rectangular part in the center. And the top part of that center, that T-shaped building, is their tabernacle or auditorium. Some of these have a slight hill, so even if you can't sit in the auditorium because of crowds, you can sit up on the hill and look down, and sort of like the Mann Music Center in Philadelphia. You see the loop around here, and just all the tents or building sites within this camp meeting. And then oddly enough, for all this woodsiness, and you have this very strict grid pattern, like, you know, right out of Philadelphia or any town. So it's sort of these juxtapositions of, you know, nature, and then, hey, we're in this town. But that's how a lot of them are, one way or another. You have to have, hello there. We'll start again. I've only been going a half hour, so we'll start the whole process. No, come on in, come on up. It's easier to see, I think. Thanks for coming out tonight. We're talking about Brandywine Summit Camp Meeting. This is their tabernacles or auditorium. And again, it's on this slope, and it can fit a lot of people. And that's just another picture of it in that the circle, which is rectangular. I won't make any more jokes about circles, oblong, squares, and rectangles. And this is a typical altar or stage in all these camp meetings. Most of them have some type of, you know, word and various decorations to, you know, as any church would have for the most part. Decorations probably isn't the right word. And then if you're the minister, that's what you would see. Hopefully there'll be a few more people in the audience. And then we have the other parts of the camp meeting. If you really were smart, you'd buy one of these cottages to the left, because then you wouldn't have to really sit into the barn. You could just sit outside on your porch. And porches were so important in all these camp meetings, especially ones where you really are next to your neighbor. I mean, you really have to love your neighbor here. So there's strict rules from the very beginning: no alcohol. Today, you know, no music or nothing loud after 10 o'clock. But you really have to be in the right frame of mind to want to hang out here for the summer with so many people so close and such a quiet place. Now, one interesting thing about Brandywine Summit is that it started out all tents. They brought actually tents, canvas up from some sailmaker, et cetera, from Wilmington, and everybody was in a tent on some type of platforms. I think only about 13 feet wide. So they were long, narrow tents. But something happened here, which is interesting in that people got tired of, you know, living in old moldy canvas tents. So what they, and transporting this material. So a lot of them would build some type of box or shed in the back so they could store their tent. Okay. But of course, you'd still have to come back the next year and set that tent up. So then they said, well, the heck with that. Why don't we just build our cottage on the tent platform? So that's what you see here, brown being the frame part, and often the porches were still tented. But, you know, by the late 1800s, virtually all the tents had converted to cottages. And because of how narrow these lots were, these tend to be, you know, elongated for the most part out the back. Sometimes you had side yards as land became freed up. But that's how we went from tent to cottage. And today the cottages some are in wonderful shape and very interesting. Some aren't. And again, this is the place where you have trees growing up through the roofs, because you can't cut trees in the Johnson's Woods. They want to keep that canopy alive and well. I don't know what they do with the ashes, but for the ash trees. But here's just some example of some of the architecture. You see board and batten, which is, oh, I'm going to turn this on and see if it works. You see board, you know, this, I'm going to declare this not working, but you see the board and batten on the either sides of the doors there. You know, the dental work, which is those sort of shark teeth on the base of the gable. And these are just elements you find in a lot of camp meetings. It's a little bit of Queen Anne's, a little bit of what they call Carpenter's Gothic architecture, primarily styling features. And you see this in camp meetings all over, which we're going to see. Only God should look down upon us. Well, in this particular camp meeting, you can't have a second floor. So they maybe have some lofts up there, but you're not allowed to be on the second floor, stand on your balcony and look down. Only God should be able to do that. So this is a very unique setting. But if you remember those pictures of the tents, gable, 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 gable. You see it right here, and you're gonna see that repeated, and I'm gonna keep saying it. So that's one thing you won't forget when you leave here about the side, the gable building pattern throughout all these camp meetings, replicating the tent pattern of 100 years before. Again, there's that big tree. We also have another peculiar thing happening in Brandywine Summit Camp Meeting. We have built from within cottages. Now, built from within is an architectural term that was drummed into me at University of Pennsylvania. That's a lie. I made up this term because I didn't know what to call these places. But built from within cottages, if you think of a normal stick-built building, a building made out of 2x4s, you build the skeleton of the building, and then you put your cladding on the outside, right? And you keep the rain off it, and your insulations and the inside, and then you put your drywall up. That's great. They do the same thing here too. However, because these tents were so close, if you were in the middle tent and the people on either side had converted to frame buildings, it was so close you couldn't get out there and swing a hammer to put the cladding up. And so we have these built from within, and here you go. You have this poor guy in the middle who is still using a tent, and then one day says, enough of this. And so they had to get out and actually put the cladding on the inside of the framework. And these are just some examples. This is the greatest example. However, now they've taken some of they've lost some of the cottages, so you can actually see how that plays out. This was an Inquirer article back in the day when I did this nomination, I think probably in 1991. And again, just some more pictures. It's just really delightful to walk through here. Is that a little blurry, isn't it? I haven't heard anybody complain, but it's just,
Okay.
is it?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. And often these streets are named after the various people or in this case, denominations associated with the camp meeting. Some really great doors. I mean, that is a really cool screen door there. In fact, it's just really cool. And again, that they've had to cut away their building as that tree grew towards the end. And this is inside Betty Purchase's cottage, who you'll see next. She is there with her husband, and they're sort of the leaders of the camp meeting there. And her husband's a minister. They're from King of Prussia, and they may have moved now. So this is almost a semi-permanent place where they live several months out of the year. It's a little bit bigger than most camp meetings, or cottages. But there's Betty, and there's Rich on the left over there. And so this is probably one of the nicer cottages there. This one on the left, upper left, is waiting to be restored in case you want to, get a summer cottage. It's there for the taking. And this one's been restored, just sitting there empty at this point. So just have an idea of what the interiors look like. Probably not all that much different from the tents, except that usually the tents, they hang Muslim material inside, and they don't have to do that with the frame buildings. All these camp meetings have additional structures. They have little stores for ice cream sometimes, and this is like a little library, reading room, office on the upper left. They also have pavilions, which is just a smaller auditorium, maybe for the youth meetings, little picnics or whatever, but they almost all have that. And, this is just an example at Brandywine Summit. Often when cottages are lost, they have an empty space, and somebody will start doing landscaping to create some type of garden or prayer garden or whatever. So this is just typical of what you see in these camp meetings. I have this garage here. Why do I have that here? Well, what happened was that back in the day when you drove your car. Thanks for coming. Oh, no problem. We'll keep going here. So back in the day when you had a car, you had to really put it in a garage. They weren't tightly sealed, they were open. And so you had garages that were built around the perimeter. Again, you couldn't drive down these narrow streets. So very few garages are left, but the architectural historian in me, of course, took a picture of a garage because I think it's an interesting part of the 20th century history. And we'll just end by seeing the purchases. They were so nice. I hadn't seen them in 30 years. Come on in, we'll be there. And, Rich has that nice mustache or beard growing there now. And so it was really fun to see them again. Chester Heights camp meeting is really around the corner in Chester Heights. It was the one that sort of had that depressing information about the Civil War and why that came about. And I'm not going to talk much about it. I'll tell you why in a moment, but these are my pictures from, they look really grainy, but they're from the National Register nominations, had to be black and white pictures, black and white prints. And you can see they're a very Greek revival looking tabernacle. Was quite a building, and really incredible Carpenter Gothic, sort of rustic as well, buildings. And they started because they wanted a nice place for people to go outside of, from Philadelphia into the country to be together to pray. And they were sort of appalled by some of the normal vacation things that people could do. So they started this in 1872, and it really lent itself for other organizations to come in and use the space as long as they didn't, preach anything contrary to what they were preaching. John Wanamaker brought people out to this site. We just talked about John Wanamaker. He brought his Presbyterian Sunday schools out to this site. Unfortunately, a few years after we got it listed on the National Register, it had 2 fires. The last fire, I quote unquote kids, but they weren't trying to set the place on fire. It just was an extremely windy day, and the fire started and burned the place down. Basically, just ripped through it. All this woodwork, nobody was there. It was off season. It's, I don't know, I would say probably 75% burned out, but I drove there just to check it out. And there's a woman I'd worked with again 30 years before to put this on a National Register, and they rebuilt a new building. They're doing things to try to make it come back. They've had to sell some of their land. So you have this big sort of townhouse development right there. So they definitely have some challenges in front of them, but I think it's great perseverance that they're still trying. So let's skip over to Lansville in Lancaster County. And some of these I'd never heard of before, but just in doing research, and sometimes I found one just on a map. I think one outside of just once you get above the Lehigh Tunnel on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, I happen to find one. I haven't visited that yet, but this is Landisville Camp Meeting. This is the one that we also gave a little preamble about, and for His glory, they 2 people I mentored, they both asked if I was saved or if I was religious. So they're a little more forward in that in a very, very nice way. The people couldn't have been more welcoming and gave us a tour, and it was really, really wonderful. But that's their method there. And this is a beautiful camp meeting. It was open, as you see, in 1870, again, post-Civil War. There's a cottage from the Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia from 1876. So today there's 54 cottages, and they're all occupied for the summer. So most of these places open up in May and they go into October. I'm sorry, when I talked to that, I was talking off my picture. So there you go. That's their sign when you come in. And here's just a map of that of the camp meeting. This one is right near the town. But again, when you get into it, you don't know there's a town around it. These are just such peaceful places, and lacking some of the trees you've seen before. But the upshot of that is it has this beautiful town green. And again, when you think of city planning these days, people talk about the town green and all that. They didn't have to go anywhere. They could just go to these camp meetings and see how to do it, really. So just some great pictures. Of course, we had a beautiful day to boot. And this is from one of the cottages looking down onto the circle. This is their tabernacle, drawing of it. Very interesting because it's a huge building, and these garage doors all open up to let the fresh air in. And there's the interior. And again, slanted, on a bit of a hill, and they can pack hundreds of people in here. And it's sort of sad because you see some of these programs and there's, sort of like this tonight, that's not a lot of people. And, but, they have enough people to put full programs together for when they meet for, say, 2 weeks in the summer. Otherwise, they're just there to live in these places for the summer. And again, some of the buildings, I'm not sure whether, I believe this building was from the Centennial Exhibition, and it actually looks like some of the architecture found there, but I don't know that for certain. Some of these have some great Italianate influences too. You see the double door, the arch door, the arch windows, and just really wonderful elements. There's some stick style stuff going on in some of these buildings. So somewhat of a mixture of architectural traditions and influences. Another building, great, another great Italianate style door. The birds like it here. Everybody's at peace. And these are hard to see. These just some old pictures of this camp meeting, but you can see they looked a little bit more rustic back in the day, which makes sense. Almost, I wouldn't say like Adirondack type of camp, but a little bit more. I mean, I'm looking at the bridge down in the lower right, and things have changed. You don't really get that rustic feeling there at all anymore. This is their dining hall. Most of these places have communal dining. Not necessarily every night, but they have a program of dining, and this one had a really nice dining hall. And again, these secondary buildings, this is a pavilion. It's got all those little architectural features we talked about before, and that's somewhat plated window. Really a great building. And everything was in great shape here. The one woman we met, we went to her cottage. She had totally fixed it back up. And again, these are small. They are rustic, but very nice. As long as you don't have like 10 kids, they're great. And my poor wife got dragged to many of these places. There she is talking to this woman. I can't remember her name. I apologize. Now, as I said, there's a lot going on with these camp meetings. So this is their schedule now when they do these 2-week camp meetings. I mean, at 10 o'clock, they have all these kids things going on. 11 o'clock, they have soups, pies, cookies. There are cookies back there, by the way, if you didn't see. 2 o'clock crafts. I mean, a whole bunch of different stuff that goes on. And again, now when they have these often 2-week camp meetings, it is quite scheduled. I know Brandywine Summit, they operate throughout the year, and you are required to attend certain things. So they don't want you to just come there and sit in your cottage and never attend. They want you to come in and be part of the religious element to it. Patterson Camp Meeting, to the left of Patterson, you see that little town Berwick. That's where I'm from. This is in Northeast Pennsylvania. I never knew about this place. This is sort of on the edge of coal country towards Wilkes-Barre, a town called Shikshini, which means 5 mountains. And I had no idea Patterson Grove was there. And it was really an incredibly, architecturally incredible place, and very, very active. But listen to this schedule. First of all, it says it varies. Then it says the bell announcing each service 5 a.m., sometimes as late as 6, public prayer, 8 a.m., public prayer, 10 a.m., preaching, 1 p.m., children's meetings, 2 p.m., prayer meeting, 3 p.m., preaching, 6:30 p.m., prayer meeting, 7:30 p.m., preaching. I mean, that was a lot of stuff. Now, that's not a current, that's back in the day, so to speak. But, when you went to the camp meeting, you didn't get bored. There was a lot of stuff going on. And when it was, I guess, 150 years old, they created this really cool, but hard to take a picture of a map of the place. And this is a little bit different. I mean, again, we have that oblong square, but the tabernacle's in the middle of it, as opposed to the end of one of the squares. So it's a little bit different. You see the big loop road, and then a little bit more of a hodgepodge, if you will, of buildings. So you don't have that strict grid. Another great picture from, I'm not sure exactly when this was, but you can see all the buildings, and again, quite a place. They would have hundreds and hundreds of people show up at these camp meetings at times. This is their tabernacle. Again, Bird likes it, and rather simple building. If you remember, I showed you this picture before, and again, I told you one thing I'm going to talk about tonight is how this rhythm of the front end gables of the tents and how that carried over. As you can see, for anyone, I discuss it, and really you can see it's very evident here at Patterson Grove. But there's something else that occurs at Patterson Grove, and this is this gable treatment. It just about every building has this wonderful scroll saw, very Victorian decorative elements. And I guess one started doing it, they all started doing it. But yeah, I could have had, many, many more pictures of some of these features, and they're all just a little bit different. So it was incredible to walk through here and see all that. And then these buildings, some of them were placed so close together that, I mean, it's really amazing. You know, I'm not from quote unquote coal country, but it was right around the corner. And when I look at this yesterday, I was going through this, I'm like, it sort of reminds you of some of the coal towns. And I don't know whether that's part of that influence, but again, you need to be on good terms with your neighbors because you're very close to them. And obviously you're not going to drive down that street. We met this woman named Flossie and other people. She took us to her cottage. She had just fixed up. She showed us pictures of the cottage before that they got into it, and squirrels had destroyed it. The whole thing was falling apart. So for people in historic preservation, when you hear, oh, we can't bring this building back, Flossie brought the building back and she did a great job. So if Flossie can do it, I think many people can bring their buildings back. Some of these buildings have dormitories, or some of these camp meetings have dormitories. This building is really their community building. It's got a large dining hall. Again, their communal dining hall on the first floor. It's got an ice cream shop. And then it's got these just great rooms and hallways upstairs, very simple rooms, little air conditioner. But this is where people stay if you're guests. And I really was intrigued by, you know, just the whole style of this and the woodwork. And it's a bit, you know, the serenity up here as well, even though I don't know about that fluorescent light over the bed. But anyway, here's their cafeteria and there's Flossie. I told you, she's a very nice person. In this particular camp meeting, almost all the cottages had some name. And we did peek in there. And a lot of them here, they like to have all these sayings and things. And I think, you know, if there's anything that sums up this whole camp meeting movement, would be the one on the right: love one another and treat everyone with kindness. I mean, isn't that the word we'd all like to live by? But again, so many of these places here had these little sayings, and it was, oh, did I have that twice? Oh my gosh, I could have saved a PowerPoint slide. So let's move on. Pittman Grove, we're going to go to New Jersey now, and probably has anyone been to Pittman, New Jersey, and been to Pittman Grove? So Pittman Grove is really where, you know, Pittman sort of originated from. They went into this grove, they created this camp meeting, and the town grew up around it. And it's really strange because downtown is literally a half block away. So their main strip, their, you know, downtown buildings, and then you go through the parking lot, and there's the parking lot, and there's the camp meeting. And the camp meeting is basically morphed into part of the town now. So even though there's still events going there, the town owns the tabernacle. They use it as public space. So it's sort of a quasi camp meeting, but they still do their camp meetings there every year. This is one of the rare places that they're permanent buildings. So people just live there as if they, you know, they were permanently built buildings. But in reality, it started out as a camp meeting. What does this structure remind you of? That's right. Yep, Eastern State, right in Philadelphia. You're absolutely right. It's uncanny to look at that and not think about Eastern State and other prisons. But it's not a prison, far from it. But as you can see, to the right is downtown Pittman, and you just walk across that parking lot and you're right in this really cool place. It's a little simpler. You don't see as much of that, you know, decorative features on the buildings. You know, as you can see, you have vinyl siding. These are permanent structures. People live here. And so you feel a sense of that permanency, a little bit different than the more transient other communities. But again, they're built, you know, face to face, you know, porch to porch along these tiny streets. There's 12 streets, you know, 12 apostles, but of course, New Jersey, you think of Bruce Springsteen, 10th Avenue freeze out. I couldn't stop myself. I had to take a picture of that. And again, you know, I'd like to say I was dragging my wife through all these places, but it looks like she's leading me down this road here. And then just a couple other buildings, again, not quite as nice, the buildings, but to have this thing, this camp meeting, this structure, if you will, this landscape in the middle of a town is so odd and so wonderful because you just walk into it. And again, it's like walking into a residential park, you know, a park that has people living in there. again, we get to the circle, and this really is a circle, or maybe more like an oval. And here's the tabernacle, huge structure that was built again in the 1870s, and then they built these side elements in the early 1900s, and with this rounded element at the end. And there's the interior. You see that lost soul sitting down there contemplating God. It was very interesting. Actually, he's like the city maintenance guys on his phone, but I thought that was a neat thing. Anyway, wonderful place and very close, just over the bridge. Waldheim is one of the newer camp meetings established in 1904. It's in Allentown, and it's, as you can see, it was all in place before World War I. Their tabernacle either fell down or had a fire, so they did have to rebuild their tabernacle, which is a shame, but it's interesting how they did it. But they had three prerequisites for this. They needed to have easy access to and from the city of Allentown, because they had been having their camp meeting elsewhere, and that didn't quite work out. They needed accessibility to the railroad, again, good transportation, and they needed good wells. You needed good water, and when you're in a city area, water's so important. They had beer concerns, not that they wouldn't get any, but their other place, there were a lot of beer selling. And again, around the periphery of these camp meetings, you had various nefarious people, setting up shop, and they would do weird things there. So they, wanted to get away from that. So they created Waldheim Park. And as you can see here, the suburbs certainly have caught up to Waldheim Park, but it's on a high wooded place. And for all that stuff around it, you don't feel like there's anybody around it. So it's really weird. Weird in a good way. There's their round tabernacle, and again, all rebuilt, but they rebuilt it like it was, which is terrific. Really a beautiful place, just set in the wood. The buildings here, I think they've lost a lot of buildings over the years, and again, you have peaks and valleys economically in these camp meetings. So this one has suffered somewhat, but again, there's people, when we were there, a guy just come up from Florida for the summer. This is early spring when we were here, probably about this time of year. So the buildings are a little simpler, but they have really cool tree houses here. So that's one thing I like about Waldheim Park. They had the best tree houses. They made use of those trees. All right, we're getting towards the end. We're going to talk about Perkasie Park. Another another camp meeting we put on a national register. The sign is upright. Sorry for that photograph. This is near the town of Perkasie in Bucks County. Are you all familiar with Perkasie? If not, you should go there. It's a beautiful town. Right on the edge is this group of Lutherans now, but United Church of Christ folks. They set up this place. They went out and purchased the land, and in very short order, they had a large number of cottages and their tabernacle built. So this one really just sort of happened overnight or within a couple of years. And I think mainly because it was just so easy to get to. The Liberty Bell trolleys I showed you before ran right next to it, and you had the town of Perkasie right there. They have a really gorgeous auditorium. It's built in the, it's an extension of what you see in the lower picture. But one cool thing here is on the left, they have a residence for the preachers that come in. So they don't just send them out in the rain with the umbrella on a horse. They let them stay the night. And a couple of these places had it. I think Chester Heights had one too, and some others have that feature, which is really cool. Now, one thing they had here was this woman, and I don't know who she was, but I think when the ministers came here for their Bible conference in 1912, she kept them in order. You needed somebody to make sure these guys didn't get out of hand. But this is just a picture. There's the auditorium in the back, just showing how these places were used not just for camp meetings, but for other people to come in. They also did a lot of stuff for kids. They still do. Kids are really important in these. So they have all kinds of youth programs. And for whatever reason, back there and there, they made them stand like this for photographs. I'm not sure. I don't really see anybody except for the kid on the second kid on the right, second kid. He's the only one smiling. Everybody else is like, why do they make us stand like this for a photograph? Even the adults, they made them stand like that for a photograph. And again, nobody's really smiling. The guy doesn't look like he's having fun, but we'll look at the woman's face in front of him. She doesn't know what's going on. So very, very strange things happen in Perkasie Park. But when you go there today, it's beautifully maintained. I think all the cottages are full and fully functioning. I think they're non-denominational now. They've been that way since 1968. This is their little store that they have open in the summer. And just some great pictures of buildings. They're a little bit larger there too. Back down in New Jersey, this is the last camp meeting. Malaga, I can never get that right. We just sort of stumbled on this one. I happened to see it on the internet. Started in 1869. Again, these nice arches or entrances that you see all over. This one's a little bit different. It's quite spread out. You can see it on the left. And there are people that live there all year long. And it's just there's a different feeling here. I did talk to a few people and, everybody's very friendly and very nice. And I think the feeling is mainly because of the tabernacle, which I'll show in a moment. Again, aftermath of the Civil War, it's quite large. Again, 140 cottages. And this is, if you want to have a cottage here and purchase a cottage, there's some things you must do to show that you are, devout and that you'll be part of the place. You're not just going to live in one of the cottages because, you can buy it for cheap or whatever. You have to be committed. You have to be checked to be a part of this community. And these are, you might call religious communities. And there's something like that for all these camp meetings. They want to make sure that you sort of pass the test. And those South Jersey oaks all over here providing the shade. This one was different because it actually had there's my wife again, poor soul. But anyway, it actually had a church, a little chapel in the middle of it. Had some modern buildings. Building on a lower level is, again, they had a full auditorium here, a large building. But one of the things that was sort of weird about this building is that they lost their original tabernacle. And in 1959, they built this, basically a cinder block building. And, you've seen the other tabernacles and how odd I believe this one looks here. It really doesn't help, in my opinion, the appearance of this. And it's a shame that they didn't rebuild this cool building, right? But hey, you have to do what you have to do. Now, again, we were there off season. That building could be alive and well all summer long with all kinds of events. So I'm not saying not saying anything bad. It's just, wow, what a cool building they lost for one reason or the other. Now, we're going to go to Mount Gretna. Has anyone here been to Mount Gretna? A lot of people have been to Mount Gretna. If you haven't gone to Mount Gretna, you have a couple hours to kill, go to Mount Gretna because it is really a cool place. Here they actually have, I think, 2 camp meetings, but they have a main camp meeting, and right next to it, I mean, literally across the street, they have a Chautauqua. So the camp meeting is quite large and absolutely gorgeous. This is how it was laid out. It was laid out all at once. It was developed by a person of means, and they began selling cottages right from the get-go. It's interesting. I don't know whether it was because there was a lake and there was other features of this landscape, but the circle, which is sort of in the middle on the right, is quite small compared to the size of this overall camp meeting. And this is what it looks like today. A lot of cottages are now gone. Things are spread out. I call it the instant camp meeting because there were issues at another camp meeting in Stoverdale. And so Robert Coleman, he's the one that started or made his fortune off the Cornwall furnace. He offered to, I guess, give the land, and Mount Gretna accepted. It became Mount Gretna. And in that first year, there were already 102 cottages. So it was an instant success. Late again, 1892. And there was various cottage rentals, rent them by the day. 2 stories were less expensive than a 1 story, but they were quite successful. we walked through here probably in May, and again, no one's really there, but it's all open to you. It's again like a residential park, and I recommend going for a stroll. We went there on a weekday, and it was just really gorgeous. It's weird though, because there aren't people around, so you just walk around and see this. They've obviously kept their trees, and they're very narrow streets where you don't drive down, you park in the periphery, like most of these. Maybe that was different in Malaga. Malaga, they drove throughout, whereas most of these you drive around the perimeter. But again, just some great pictures, wonderful architecture, this round porch. Now, like some others, they have a round auditorium, and designed by this gentleman named John, I guess, Kiley. But it's a very interesting structure from a structural standpoint, how it relies on both these wood trusses, as you can see, and then a cable right in the middle that holds everything together. And there's been studies done on these. So that's one of the wonderful things about this camp meeting. Right next to it, you have the Pennsylvania Chautauqua, started the exact same year. What is a Chautauqua? I'm going to change courses here. We're jumping away from camp meetings. We're going to go a little bit in Chautauqua. We're just going to look at two of them, including Mount Gretna. I have to read some things because I went on and on about camp meetings. So a little bit about a Chautauqua. Chautauqua, it's also got 3 U's in that word, which is sort of cool, and 3 A's. But anyway, Chautauqua was founded as an outdoor educational experience for Sunday school teachers by John Vincent, a Methodist minister, and Lewis Miller, a local businessman, I think in Ohio. And they started on Lake Chautauqua, hence the name, New York, in 1874. So it was really started to provide education to make Sunday school teachers better Sunday school teachers. The summer camp format was popular with families, and the movement spread rapidly, bringing education, culture, physical and religious activities, and entertainment to rural America. There were once over 200 Chautauquas. The advent of the automobile, radio, and movie theaters caused the demise of most Chautauquas. Well, we'll get into that in a second too. 4 pillars: arts, education, religion, and recreation. You see religion is the 3rd dot. And that's probably one of the main things that separate It's certainly a main thing that separates the camp meeting movement getting out there and the Chautauqua movement. It's more, I would say, well, arts and education, philosophical discussions, things of that nature, and being outdoors, and less on religious things. I think this is the last thing I'm going to read. The purpose and mission of the Pennsylvania Chautauqua, which is a satellite Chautauqua, since it's not the main Chautauqua in New York, shall be the advancement of literary, scientific, intellectual, physical, and social welfare, and the promotion of cultural and religious activity, recreation, and entertainment. So fit right into that. And when you go there today, I think you will, even if you just walk like we did, I think you'll experience all that. This is their auditorium, and unfortunately, it was that rounded building, but it burned and they rebuilt it. However, this portion on the left is still there. And so it's a beautiful building, again, in the woods. There's the interior of this, great, and they have a full program there, music and entertainment throughout the summer. And, you can see the road. I mean, it's built right into the road, but there's that old adage, work with the land, build where you can. Who said that? I did. That's fine. Sounds good though. Almost as good as Daniel Burnham, but not quite. But anyway, again, they have a full music and arts scene there all year long, as I believe a lot of Chautauquas do. Here again is a very Greek revival type building, which is their philosophical hall. And then on the right, you could just see there's just so much going on here. There are a lot of tourists that come here. So I guess they have road signs to direct those tours. Little buildings here and there. And then again, they have this man-made lake, which is right there. They have picnic pavilions, some swimming, things of that nature in this little lake. So it's a really wonderful, I guess you know what we're going to talk about next. It's a really wonderful place to go to. I don't have as many pictures of buildings here, but what you do there is you just park your car, spend an hour or 2 or 3 walking around. You don't have to go to their festivals. You don't have to be there on weekends when there's 1 million people there. Just take a day in May and go check it out. Our last feature tonight is the Eaglesmere Chautauqua. Or anybody here familiar with Eaglesmere? So I've been going up there most of my life and still go up there. And actually, as an intern, did the work necessary to put the most of the town on a national register in the 1996. And then we circled back and put the hiking trails and railroad grade and some other stuff around the lake and expanded the district. So it's a great mountain community. It's 2,100 feet above sea level. So it's until the last few years been quite cool in the summers and cold and snowy in the winter. And Chautauqua was founded there in the 1890s, but it only stayed around for about 4 years or 6 years because of distractions. It wasn't because of radios and automobiles. We'll show you what happened. And I guess the same thing could have happened in Mount Gretna or any of these Chautauquas. But it started in 1896. There were a bunch of, Eaglesmere had become a land of sort of the center. All around it was tree cutting, timbering, lumber. And they would take it out of the mountains and take it to Williamsport. And Williamsport had millionaires. Well, more millionaires lived in Williamsport, than a lot of places. And they basically timbered, and then there was coal mining, everything around in the mountains. But you had this enclave that remained around the lake in Eaglesmere, and some of these folks created this Chautauqua, and it was in sort of a marshy area at the one end of the lake. It's a natural glacier lake, not quite a mile long. And that's why you have the boardwalks, because it could get a little swampy in that area. And then the lower picture is at night they'd have vespers. So they would do their sort of religious service, at least at night, and people would walk from the cottages, from the little inn they had to the beach, and they would have their vesper service. This is a really weird picture because on the left, you would have water, but it's just occupied by boats. And then you have people sitting in boats that are on the boardwalk, which is now the beach. So who knows? But that is what they did, I guess, every night. An inn was built, and around the inn, there were cottages. I think originally about 54 cottages. And there is the layout. The lower part is the lake and the docks, and where all those boats just were. And then it's just a 2 or 3 minute walk to the Forest Avenue and to what was then called the Chautauqua Inn. So that was great. The trouble is with Eaglesmere, number one, it's 2,100 feet above sea level, so it was cool, and you could get you'd get away from the hot climate. But there was also this wonderful lake, and there were hotels all around the lake and cottages. Bottom line is there are a lot of diversions. There was this beautiful beach on the upper left that you could just hang out at. And there was, of course, boating and all kinds of things. When they did the water carnival, which they still do, this is after the Chautauqua closed, 1914, but you can see they sort of made fun of whatever they were drinking there. This says Chautauqua grape juice. So I think the people that went to Eaglesmere Chautauqua, as they say, were they sort of lapsed the regimen of the Chautauqua, and they started doing other things around the lake like we still do today. In short order, the Chautauqua closed. They took their fence down, and the Chautauqua Inn became the Forest Inn. And I remember this hotel quite well, but it closed in 1978. And like all the hotels in Eaglesmere, it was taken down. It hired a Philadelphia architectural firm named Rankin and Kellogg to build its quote unquote casino, which is really a social hall. There's a picture of the Eaglesmere of the Forest Inn back in its heyday, and looking towards the beach. As you can see, I think the beach is that open part of the trees. And then here's the interior of the recreational hall, the casino. And I remember when that was functional, though I don't know if I ever went into it, but there was bowling alleys, dancing, all these fun things to do in a resort. Today, yes, the building is gone about where those ferns are, but the grounds are all still there. And again, it's just a 2 minute walk to the beach. The houses, the cottages are there. Some have been remodeled, some have been built new. They've lost some, but for the most part, that area is still there. It's a very desirable place to live. It's called the Eaglesmere Park, and it's very easy to get into to the lake. And today, this is what the lake looks like. You can see the beach down at the lower right. It's just a beautiful place to be. If you remember that, well, you don't have to remember it, the black and white picture of the beach in the lower right, the beach today looks pretty much the same. They've done well keeping Eaglesmere as it was. So the Chautauqua basically developed the north end of the lake where the beach is, and really is what started the Eaglesmere Park, which again is pretty much remains as it was today, except for the hotel. And like all good Chautauquas, there was music, there was ongoing events, and today that Music in the Mountains continues up at Eaglesmere. So I want to say thank you to everybody, especially my wife, again, for dragging her around to all these places and going to all these places. It was great putting this together. Various people to thank that really hosted us throughout this event. And I have Kim in quotes in Lannisville because I really don't remember her name, but I think it was Kim. And then various citations for some of the information from this, for this, and that's just a notice for anybody that may see this as a video later on. So thank you very much. And any questions?
I'm just surprised these things still exist and that it's still functioning. And I assume they're associated with particular churches.
Yeah, or they're non-denominational, or most of them have quote unquote associations where they have board members and they do what they have to do. They collect the rents, or they sell the cottages, or they lease the cottages. And then of course, there's a whole itinerary for the camp meeting itself, the sort of the spiritual element of the camp meeting. And then there's the physical element of the camp meeting. I'd never heard of them. I mean, I'd gone to camp as a kid, but there are Bible camps out there and sort of church camps. These are, totally different. And because there's very few places that aren't family buildings where people live. I mean, there's the dormitories and places like that, but for the most part, it's cottages with families, close knit, looking at each other and walking right into the circle. So, again, from a city planning standpoint, it really is what a lot of people try to build. They try to make that central town square as a feature of a development, or they used to at least. And, here it's alive and well in camp meetings. And only the Brandywine Summit had, except for Chester Heights had the fire, but the Brandywine Summit is one that really has had issues with their cottages. And it may be that, people want to live in a little bit bigger cottage. It's tough to live in a long, narrow building right next to another person. So that may be a problem with their camp meeting because they keep that only one story. And, I don't know if I said it too much, but when I was doing Chester Heights and Brandywine Summit, we looked at World War II and what happened after World War II. And, people, for the first time in their lives were really all over the place from the war. And so a lot of people didn't come back. They moved to other locations. They had the GI Bill. They had eventually freeways, air conditioning, Disney World, and going to these little camp meetings. Again, you have to be somebody who really wants that type of lifestyle, or for all summer long or for 2 weeks. And a lot of people chose Disney World. I mean, or go to church on Sunday, and that's your obligation is met. So, but yes, ma'am.
Yeah, when people own one of these, cottages or your tent sites, do they own the land underneath it, or they just own the building? They pay ground rent?
There's some do, some lease, some own the building. I think in that one early site plan, those were all lots, all individual parcels. So I think most of them are some type of lease type of thing. And you have building committees, and what you can do to the outside of your building, has to go through a committee.
Yeah, that was my next question.
Yeah.
They have like the historic.
Yeah, because you see.
Version of a historical commission.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, Chester Heights was great because it had so much of this stuff. And Chester Heights was really hurting even when we did the nomination long before the fire. And I think what happened there is that the architecture was so great that nobody had the money to spend to recondition these buildings when you're not going to winterize them. You're only going to be there a few weeks, maybe out of the summer. And I think it's my personal thought that that's why they were hurting. People really weren't, investing in the property. It looked like a movie set for, what is M. Night? How do you?
And then shower.
Yes, they should just rent it out for a movie set. It would have been incredible. When you walked into that place, you didn't feel like you're in the 20th century. It was really incredible. And all that, for the most part, all that architecture was still there. But yeah, Patterson Grove, all that architecture has been preserved and it's amazing. Pittman, you can see again that sort of permanent residency status of it, which it is now. You have different siding. You don't have a lot of ornamentation on the buildings anymore. But you have to love thy neighbor at these places.
Yeah.
You are right next to these people and it's quiet. As I said, you don't really hear much from the outside unless I don't know of any of them that had like a highway nearby or an airport. So you might hear somebody mowing the grass or whatever, but it's pretty quiet. It's pretty quiet. Thank you, Cindy,
Well, thank you
for putting
all.
this on. Cindy
Yeah,
does
thank
all the
you.
work, so.
Yes, but you offered to do presentations, which we greatly appreciate. We hope you'll do another one in the future, and anybody else who is able to. I want to just thank you again for doing this. I want to thank the township supervisors for supporting the Historic Resources Committee, providing us a budget. And I want to thank you all for coming. Oh, and the township staff, because they are always helpful with anything that's historical, setting up, making copies, doing everything. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Oh, that sounds.
That was fantastic.
Yeah.
You know, I wonder if I'm saying.
No, you were.